Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Thursday, October 24th, 2019 meeting of the Safe and Successful Kids Interlocal Board. I'd like to point to your attention this meeting, like all meetings in this chamber, is governed by the Open Meetings Act, and that is posted at the back of the room. We'd like to begin our meeting by having a roll call. Would you help us with that, please?
Barbara Blair.
Here.
Larry Taylor-Beard.
Here.
Lady Boswell.
Present.
Kathy Janik.
Here.
Richard McGinnis.
Here.
Betty Sho.
Here. That was bad. Can I do that again? Here. Thank you very much. It looks like we're all present. And the next item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from our August 29th, 2019 meeting. That was forwarded to you electronically, and the staff was kind enough to provide hard copies now. Ms. Danik.
I would move approval of the minutes as printed.
I would second.
We have a motion by Ms. Danik and a second by Mr. McGinnis. Is there any discussion of the motion to approve the minutes? Hearing no discussion, would you call the roll on the vote?
Barbara Blair.
Yes.
Mary Taylor-Beard.
Yes.
Lady Boswell.
Yes.
Kathy Janik.
Yes.
Richard McGinnis.
Yes.
Betty Sho.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you very much. Our next agenda item is public comments on items not listed on the agenda. Is there anyone in the council chamber that would like to make a comment on anything related to our board that's not on the agenda? Long pause while everybody rushes to the microphone, and then we say thank you very much. Item number 5 on our agenda today is School Resource Officers Program Status Report. Who will help us with that? Mr. Neal, thank you.
Well, there we go. Is the PowerPoint on? I should have checked that, I'm sorry. Oh, no, I thought. Okay.
It's not
In your packet of materials, you'll see both the handout and the PowerPoint. They contain basically the same information. The handout has a little bit more detail. As you know, PowerPoint has just the main bullet points. I'll be using the PowerPoint to do the conversation, but please feel free to look on with either one. This past legislative session, LB 390 was passed. LB 390 is set to establish specific requirements for school resource officer memorandums of understanding with public school systems. It includes 7 new requirements. Those requirements are going to be established in a model program through the Nebraska Department of Education. What I'd like to share with you today are those 7 requirements and how those fit into our existing memorandum of understanding. So if you would, I'll use that PowerPoint that you have in your handouts. And the requirements include these 7: 20 hours of training for all SROs, 20 hours of training for at least 1 staff in every building within SRO, ensure data is collected and allow for analysis of the data, identify school or police policies regarding notification of intent to interrogate students, identify school or police policies regarding the process for notifying students of their rights prior to interrogation, and identify policies that address what behaviors are referred to police. Finally, number 7, identify a student or parent complaint process. So then if you look at the next slide, which is slide number 4, and referenced as the first section on the handout, slide 4, the requirement is requiring 20 hours of training for all SROs and required 20 hours of training for at least 1 staff in every building within SRO. Through our existing MOU and our existing practices with Lincoln Police Department, we already have that amount of time of training, and that includes training over a lifetime of that police officer's experience. So it includes specific SRO training, staff development, post-secondary work, and training in conferences. And while the law requires that training for at least 1 administrator in each building to ensure there's at least 1 person to coordinate with school resource officers, in our practices, we'll train all administrators in those practices so that all administrators, regardless of who is working with a student or family, has gone through that training and can work effectively with that SRO. Yes, Kathy?
So, John,
Mrs. Danik?
we share SROs in the middle school. So we are making sure that there's training at all of our middle
At
schools.
all
as
of our
they're
middle
sharing.
schools and all of our administrators. So if there would be a discipline issue where an SRO would be involved, any of the administrators that are working with that student and family will have gone through this training. It's both effective with the buildings themselves, but it also helps when you have movement of staff and administrators from one building to the other, that you don't accidentally move an administrator who has that training and then not have somebody that's still in that building. So we'll include all of that, even though it's not required in this particular bill. If you look at slide 5, requirements for ensuring data is collected and allow for analysis, there has to be a structure created for a way to measure the effectiveness of your MOU. And if you remember from a year ago, we went through a community process to develop a collection system that was a joint effort from the police department, Luke Bonkowitz, and from our educational service unit, Dr. Leslie Eastman, to create a data system that collects information going point by point through our memorandum of understanding and required data collection. So we have that system in place. And this particular meeting next year in October will actually share the first year of data. This presentation is somewhat taking the place of what will become our data report. So we're collecting data this year for the first year of that process, 1920. That data will be analyzed and put in a report and come to this board in October of 2020. Going on to slide number 6, there's 3 components here. Identify school and police policies regarding notification of intent to interrogate students. Identify school or police policies regarding the process for notifying students of their rights prior to interrogation. And identifying policies that address what behaviors are referred to police. Those elements already exist through Lincoln Police General Orders, LPS Policy 5502, and LPS Regulation 5420.8. Those are all shared with our families through our important information booklet that goes to all families, both online. We also have paper copies for families that don't have access online each year. This process is going to come as a model from Nebraska Department of Education December 1st, and we'll have a better idea if they have other specific requirements for how we communicate. So we might have some additional ways to communicate that following the model from NDE. And then slide number 7, identify a student and parent complaint process. There is already an existing complaint process for the Lincoln Police Department through the Lincoln Police Department Internal Affairs. They have a link online where people can share their concerns. There's also additional complaint processes within Lincoln Public Schools, and we have a series of places where people could lodge a complaint. It could fall under, depending on their concern, with our equity director through our Title VI, Title IX, Section 504, homeless instruction, or IDA, or it might come in under the generic term school resource officer in our Let's Talk system. They can also speak with an administrator in any building. So there's already a specific one for SROs with the city, as well as a number of different, depending on topic, coming in through Lincoln Public Schools. And finally,
Doctor,
yes.
could, for the benefit of those who may not know all of the specific terms on those systems, could you just go through, what Title VI, what Title IX, et cetera, are?
Sure. Title VI would be in our federal programs and would deal with homeless, so it's on there twice. Title IX is equity, gender equity. Section 504 would be disabilities under the Americans with Disabilities Act. I mentioned homeless instruction. Would there be a concern about the impact on teaching and learning? IDEA would be special education or an issue under special education.
Thank you.
Mr. Neal, before you continue, Ms. Danik had a question.
So what process is in place to share a concern that is lodged, say, with LPD and not LPS, and with LPS and not LPD?
Sure.
How do you share that information back and forth? I'm assuming you do, but
We have Chief Blymeister through the Lincoln Police Department. We have official contacts with the school resource officers and their vertical chain of command with the city. And then Joe Wright is our Director of Security. He takes that role along with Russ Ewing in our Student Services Department. So those two communication streams stay in regular communication about anything involving school resource officers.
And that includes the resolution of all of those,
What can be
Concern.
shared, depending on the concern and how it's concerned.
While monitoring
Right.
privacy.
We each have our requirements for privacy on different issues, so the information that can be shared is shared across. And so we can, sometimes it might be on the individual issues, and sometimes it might be how we improve service, but we might not be able to share on a particular issue. I'm looking behind me to see if that capture that. Okay.
they're nodding their heads. I
Okay.
can see them.
Thank you.
And Mr. McGinnis had a question also before we
So
continue.
there really isn't anything in the MOU that says how to share this information or how this student should contact a complaint with a complaint?
There isn't one specifically that looks like this that talks about all these different, and that's on this next slide, but I'll give a slight preview. The Nebraska Department of Education has these same 7 requirements, and they've been tasked by the legislature to come up with a model policy. Then each of the existing partnerships with an MOU need to then adapt our processes to make sure that they match that model in some substantial format. So we might, while it might look this way right now, after we find out what NDE shares in December, we might be adapting it slightly to match their model process.
Would the school have to adjust their policies at that point?
We may, yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Other questions?
Yes, Mrs. Byron?
Mr. Byers?
I have several here. I thought I'd wait to the end for questions, but I guess we're doing them now. I'm a little concerned on the communication thing that seems a little scattershot. If I were a parent, I'd kind of be with, like, there's too many places to go. I don't know exactly where I should go. And then you mentioned the model policy coming from NDE in December. So maybe that might resolve some of that, but that's just a little bit of a concern I have. It seems unclear. It doesn't seem easy to be able to go through the complaint process. Other questions that I can wait until you're done with your presentation.
Let me run through the last
Yeah,
slide, and then it's
and I'll
Why
make-
don't I
and I'll-
do that?
And I'll make sure that you're up first,
Okay.
Ms. Byers. Thank you.
The last is on slide 8, which talks about the timeline. Now through November 30th, NDE is developing the model MOU, pardon me. On December 1st, they will share that
Yeah,
with us. I'm not even going to try to use the initials anymore. They'll share that with us. And then we'll have from December to about mid-February to take our process, because we're somewhat grandfathered in because we have an existing MOU. And the staff will look at making recommendations on what needs to change in that MOU to make sure that we are now aligned with the new requirements from NDE. Then that will need to come back to the city for approval and the school board for approval. Both bodies would need to approve that because we're coming back and making a change to the agreement that we already have in place. The target would be to have that in place by mid-spring, March of 2020. The reason we want to do that as quickly as possible is we want to make sure we have time for any professional development that's required, communication with families for any new processes, and also when you try to publish something for August, it seems like you have to have it to the publishers about April 1st. So we need to give ourselves time to get materials prepared and out for summer mailings or summer presentation to families through orientation at high school and middle schools. So by August to October 2020, we'll have things in place and we'll be able to come back to you then in October 2020, both with the data from 1920 as well as an update on this MOU and any change that might have taken place from what I described today.
Thank you. Ms. Byers, would you continue with your questions?
Yeah. First of all, I really like this timeline, and it's very clear and it allows for modification, so that's great. My first question was on training, and a lot of this probably is going to get answered by that model information from Nebraska Department of Education. But what kind of training is required before SROs are going and working on the job?
I'm going to turn to the experts behind me and ask if one of them will come up and give more detail.
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah.
Good afternoon. I'm Ryan Dale with the Police Department, and I help liaison between the school resource officers and the public schools. All of our LB 390 outlines a series of training that's required for SROs. He mentioned that it's 20 hours, same for administrators, but it actually breaks it down into specific topics.
And I'm sorry, if you look at the handout on slide 4, it has them listed specifically.
Some examples are student rights, teen brain development, I think some cultural awareness topics. And a lot of those topics aren't just specific to school resource officers. They're foundational topics that we require all of our officers to have a good working knowledge of how to de-escalate conflict and how to be communicate with people of other backgrounds. We really work hard at providing a lot of cultural awareness training and things like that to all of our officers. So a lot of these requirements are new for SROs, but all of our SROs already have them in place.
I'm glad to hear that.
We have added other training, like we just brought in a training on teen brain development that was, I think, a 3-day training for all of our SROs. And we've been doing those types of things to hit some of these other topics. Also, in the summer when school wasn't in session, for the last 2 summers, we've had training combined with that included SROs and school administrators. So everyone was there in one room. They were grouped together at tables by school. So that, for instance, Lincoln High SRO was at a table with all the Lincoln High administrators. And Joe and others ran through a lot of these topics and provided training on them. And then there was scenarios for the school resource officer and administrator from that school to work through together to kind of open that communication line up better.
That sounds really good, and thank you for your explanation. I'm sure that this is just a brief overview and that you do much more, but
Right.
that sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you very
You
much.
bet.
Other questions?
Just a second, I'm going to make sure I don't have any others.
While she's preparing, I'm going to ask, when I've noticed, and maybe I'm an oversight on my part, it says requires 20 hours of training. Is that annually or cumulative, or?
It's
it doesn't
a
spell
life.
it?
The legislation requires lifetime of 20 hours. Over time, SROs will gather way more than 20 hours, but the requirement by law is 20 hours within the lifetime of that officer, professional lifetime of that officer.
In our MOU, do we have a statement of annually training or anything
We
like
have a
that?
statement of continuing training. We don't have an hour number with that.
Thank you. Ms. Byer?
I don't have any further questions, thank you.
Mayor Gillard.
Thank you, Mr. Neal. My question really is, well, first, just affirming all the good work that we're already doing through this MOU that is maybe codified at a new level through the state requirement. Is there anything, though, about the new requirements that gives you pause or concern about the ability to implement at our local level? Are there any barriers you see to a successful implementation that we should be aware of and try to help remove for your success?
I don't believe so. I think there's some outstanding work and collaboration between staff at the district and with the city and the police department. I think in looking at what is best practice and in developing a program that was based on best practice. So when Senator Pansy Brooks did her research on best practice and developed a bill, we were both looking at the same thing. So the resulting product, I think, aligns with ours, partly because she did a wonderful job of looking at best practice. She also reached out to many different communities on what they saw as best practice. So I think it ended up with something that's really good for students and families and staff and for police departments. I think what will be interesting is what comes from the Nebraska Department of Education, because we just don't know what that will be. And so we might have to do a little bit of scrambling to get the right procedures in place, but I don't see anything in the bill that would have us doing something we don't already believe in.
Thank you.
Mr. McGinnis, you had your hand up also.
No, I didn't.
Okay,
I
I'm
was
just-
pointing to make sure you saw her.
Thank you. I appreciate the help.
Thank you. So you had mentioned that the 20 hours of training is over the lifetime. Is there a portion of that that's required before they can start being an SRO, or? See what I'm saying? It's like you
right.
could say, well, they're going to have that training in 10 years.
It's not specifically stated that way, but because they have 20 hours of requirement to be an SRO, it would be implied that training is in place as they become an SRO. So we would endeavor to have that training in place at the time that they start, or short, if there's ramp up like we do with all new staff in those first few weeks of school, that ramp up occurs as they begin.
So this is an area then, since we do have a continuing education requirement in our existing MOU, that's an area where we're going above and beyond the standards that are in 390.
That's
Is that
correct.
Okay. And then a question on slide 5 with respect to the data collection. So I understand that this fall will be our first view, or our first look at the data that's been collected for this school year. How would the public have access to that information, and would there be portions of that data that we see that would not be available to the public?
That's a great question. The portion that the public will see will be what we share at this particular meeting. Since we haven't generated that report, nor have we received the questions you might have for what might be different than what's on there, what I can say is the part that's described in the data analysis that you'll receive, that could generate questions, and depending on the level of privacy based on your questions, it might be something that would have to be shared in closed session, where if your request is about data that could be shared more generally, it would be just something that would come back out in open session or online.
Okay.
We would just have to be cautious to make sure we met all of our privacy requirements.
Right. And so the public presentation then that would be made to this board in the fall would be something that would be available on the website?
Absolutely. It'll be an
and that-
open session such as this, and then available afterwards on the
I
website.
know as we were developing this body and this agreement and process, there was a lot of interest from the community on that data specifically.
Yes.
And so I think that when that report comes out in the fall, we'll want to make sure we do everything we can to get it out to the community as soon as possible.
Absolutely.
And then on slide 7, talking about the complaint process, and as you mentioned, because it may be affecting different students, there's a lot of different ways that those complaints could be initiated. Could all of those processes be started through Let's Talk?
Yes, and they can. While all of these different complaint processes exist, we would ask, if someone asked for an SRO complaint, it would go through our Safe to Say button on Let's Talk, or our SRO button in Let's Talk, and we would ask people to always go that direction.
Okay.
So there's a very small funnel of where we would ask people to go, but the complaint could come in because we have many different complaint systems, and the SROs could be involved with the student for many different reasons or ways, and so it might come in through those others. I should have explained that more accurately before.
Right. So, we'll take that complaint regardless of which of these
Wherever it
channels it
is.
comes in. If someone is confused about where to go,
Right.
then you would advise them.
So if someone would complain to their IEP manager about an issue that involved an SRO, we wouldn't say, well, that didn't come in through the SRO, so we won't deal with the SRO issue. It would just get transferred from there, or that particular part of the concern would then come over and be dealt with as an SRO question.
Right. But anyone that's interested in knowing where could just go to the Let's Talk
Go to
button
the Let's
or the
Talk
Safe
button
to-
or the Safe to Say.
All right. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you very much. Ms. Danik?
Okay, I have a couple questions. I'll finish on where Landy ended, because then I'm going to go back to slide 5. So we always talk about negative comments. Is there a place they can have positive comments? And how do we share those? Because everybody always talks about what's bad, and I'd like to know what's working.
Actually, the same place.
But we're going to share both, right?
Right. In
Okay.
the
And we encourage people to say good
SRO
things.
button and the Safe to Say, one of the 5 choices is compliment. And so somebody can go in and leave a compliment in the same place. And sometimes something will come in as a question or a concern, but through the process, compliments are shared. In fact, that happens quite often because I think both Lincoln Police Department and LPS administration work hard to meet the needs of families. And so what starts as an issue or a problem ends up many times, most of the time, being resolved in a way that people feel good about the service they receive.
It's the one thing I like about Let's Talk, is I can get both sides of an issue. Oh, I was really angry, I wrote this, and they fixed it, and I'm so grateful that they fixed that kind of comment. Okay, now back on slide 5, because we're talking about data collection, and Lenny proposed a question of giving the public options. So is there any way by our next meeting that someone can give us a timeline of when that data is going to be collected? And possibly what questions are being formulated? Are they going to be in different categories?
I'll send you a copy of the existing evaluation system, which includes all the questions, all the prompting questions, and then the data collection, the buckets we'll be collecting. And then the timeline will be, it'll be for the school year 1920. We'll analyze it in the summer of 20, and it'll come back as a report in our October meeting of 2020 as well. But I'll send you a copy of that evaluation system.
And will there be any random sampling of the community on data collection, or is this simply just through interactions?
This is all done through the 1920, and I'm turning to Dr. Eastman.
A lot of it is through the interactions and is very much ongoing, so there isn't a specific timeline, but there are a couple of exceptions to that. One is the Lincoln Public Schools perception.
I'm
I
sorry,
don't know if
yes,
we can
thank you
hear
very much.
You have a soft voice.
Thank you, thank you, board member, for pointing that out. Ms. Eastman, would you come to the microphone, please? Yeah.
I will.
Director
Be
for
delighted.
Assessment and Evaluation
There's one
for
over here.
Lincoln Public, for Educational Service Unit Number 18,
How's
serving
that?
Lincoln Public Schools.
Much better.
Much better.
Dr.
Sorry.
Eastman.
Thank you guys for your help. I was
Yeah.
listening attentively and wasn't doing my job.
And I was speaking attentively.
Would you start
Most
over?
of the data is collected in ongoing fashion and is based on interactions. One big exception to that is Lincoln Public Schools has a perception survey that was developed in-house a number of years ago, and we did add specifically some SRO questions to the perception survey for both students and for parents, and this would be all students and all parents at the middle school and the high school level, and that's administered in the spring. So that would be the timeline for that piece of data.
And that's all schools.
All schools, all students, all parents have an opportunity to respond. One of the initial questions that we added to the survey does ask if they've had a specific interaction. But even if they have not, they're asked to provide their general viewpoint on the presence of the SROs in the building.
You had some other questions, Ms. Danik?
Well, no, because they answered it, because
Okay,
she
they're
said they were
good.
going to get this with it, so there you
So it's
go.
more surveillance than sampling.
Yeah, for a lot of the data collection, it is very much ongoing, yes.
And that's an online evaluation.
The perception survey is administered via Qualtrics and is online, so anonymity is provided.
Yay.
And allows for a larger number because.
Yeah, and we've had a really, really good track record in having a very large number of students and parents respond to that perception survey. And we did have some baseline numbers on SROs that we were looking at to make sure the survey was functioning last spring.
I understand.
Yeah.
Ms. Danik has one more follow-up question. I will acknowledge Ms. Byers is next.
Just somewhere in our Safe and Successful Kids spot on our website, can we let parents know? I just say there will be ongoing collection, and the report on this
Right.
will be done in October of each year.
Perfect.
I think that helps parents know that we're working on it and it's ongoing.
Absolutely, great idea.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Danik. Ms. Byer?
Yes, thank you. Going back to the complaint process, will we have a step-by-step understanding of what happens to the complaint after it's been reported to the schools or LPD or both?
Describe again what you mean by step, just the
No, what
chain of
happens
command
to
for who
the-
handles it?
Yeah, we've talked about, lodging a complaint, but what happens to it? How does it get reviewed? Is there a method of going and determining whether it's a valid complaint or not, what happens if it's a valid complaint, those kinds of details.
I think that's something that we could create a report and send that out to the whole board, so you have a sense of what that is, and then we can include that with the minutes, so it's available to the public.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Other questions? I understand what Ms. Byers is saying, and I appreciate the question. If I file a complaint, how do I know it will be genuinely responded to? Or does
Who
this go
does
into
it
the
and
plan?
how,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
yep. No, yes, we
Little
can
bit more
definitely outline
transparency.
how that process works and make that transparent, so people
Yes.
can see how that process
Yeah,
works.
so that way parents or students at the end of the process would know, oh, this is, what was the result? And also, we may, in the future, have to consider appeals processes and things of that nature. I'm pretty sure, if I understand correctly with LPD, they have a robust internal affairs, and they have processes like that, and people are informed when they make a complaint. But on our side, the school side, I think this is a little bit new in this particular sphere, so we might need to do a little catch-up.
The topic is new. The process will follow some of the same processes we use for internal complaints. We'll write all of those out for both, so that's transparent, because it's really nice when you enter a process you've never been part of before, how it ends up. You know, what should I look for? What am I listening for? What are our timelines? So absolutely, that's a great idea to create that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions for Mr. Neal? Mr. Neal, did you have anything else you wanted to share with us today?
No, wonderful questions. We have some things to work on and get prepared for you right away, and then we'll be back again most definitely in the spring with more information from what we've found out from NDE.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, that's item 5 on our agenda. We're up to item number 6, and probably one of the more popular items. Is there anything else before the board before I acknowledge Mr. McGinnis? Nothing? I acknowledge Mr. McGinnis.
I'd like to move adjournment.
Second.
Have a motion by Mr. McGinnis and a second by Mr. Boswell for adjournment. Would you call the roll, please?
Yes.
Mary Gaines,
Yes.
Wayne Boswell,
Yes.
Kathy Bennett,
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we are adjourned. I would, I'm gonna say.